we're going to meet the people where they are, right? The audience of folks that's out there, many of them are not in the financial services world. They're certainly not in the billionaire Davos circuit. So let's dive in on this notion of risk, right? As African Americans, we see constant imagery on why we're taking more passive risk than anybody. You know, one of the most dangerous things to be on the planet is to be a Black person, let alone be a Black male in an automobile on the side of a road in a traffic stop. Please talk to us more about how Black people, Latinx people, Asian people, how all people in that want to strive and achieve more should think about, receive, and process and experience risk.
Man, how many hours do we have to go through this? And you and I get a chance to talk about this, often. It is important that we really understand how we can advance our society, and not to be, too much of a preacher here, but part of the advancing of society is to not only accept risk, but to take risk with others. And, everyone has a role in this ecosystem. The role of investors in some cases to take a risk in an investment that they're going to make, but also capital allocators who take a risk with these investors. It is risk capital. And Bob, your organization, NAIC, and the way you all have done a masterful job, I think, in enabling, Black and brown and, African American in female-run firms to be effective in engaging with the capital allocators. You provide a critical role in that ecosystem. We have to provide a critical role in that ecosystem for not only delivering capital back at the highest rates of return with the lowest loss ratio, so that's part of the risking that helps there. But it's also critical upon us to show how we contribute to the ecosystem of a better society. Okay? Part of that better society isn't just philanthropy. That's a part of it, but it's providing high quality jobs and experiences in each one of our portfolio companies. Many people don't talk about it at Vista, but one of the things we do, on average, every one of our companies increases its employment by 20% between when we buy a company and when we sell a company. Not one of the things we talk about. We increase our diversity. Okay. I think about, we've now got, I think it's 62 external board members. 70% of our boards have a woman on it and 60% have a person of color. Actually, other way around, 70% have person of color and 60% have okay. Those are all elements of our contract with the capital providers that we're going to drive changes in these organizations that not only are driving more efficient use of capital, i.e. returns, but are more efficient engagement with the community, okay? Which means not only enabling a more diverse workforce, not just hiring, enabling a diverse workforce through how we're going to drive. We have a program, Khalid Ali at our firm has developed called Conscious Inclusion, and we're driving across all of our portfolio companies. But also, how do we ensure that every one of our portfolio companies, when it leaves, which is one of my main goals, has become, carbon neutral or carbon negative. So when you come to Vista, great, we're going to work with you, your management team, increase your revenue growth, your productivity, your earnings, your diversity. But when you leave, we want you to be carbon neutral or carbon negative. Okay, and providing systems around that. So a critical part of what we have to do is assess all of that risk and deliver systems to de-risk those investments. And so part of it, and this kind of gets to that real part of, okay, well, how do you de-risk your life? Okay, how do you de-risk the decisions that you make? Part of it is, decreasing the amount of debt that you have. Okay, some of it, look, we got to, we said, go to college, take on a bunch of debt, go get a good job. Great. Now I've got 25 years ahead of me of debt to pay off. Okay, unless and until there's some other structure that can work. Right. And so that's one of the things we're focused on. We'll talk about that later. Right. And then you have to think about, when I move into a business, how do I de-risk that business? And in my job is to not only provide a platform for our investors and our senior managers of our companies to do well, but to give them, solutions, quantifiable ways to de-risk their business and de-risk their opportunity to excel as a manager of our companies or CEOs of those companies, or even within the Vista platform. And so that's what I have to think about. And so we as African Americans, Latinx folks, look, my grandfather's generation, my parents' generation, they didn't have the opportunities. They fought for civil rights to have the opportunities. And part of that opportunity was to give Bob, you and I, and others of our generation and below us the chance to take more risk, so that we can deliver more services and capital into our own communities. And so we need to honor them through taking that risk.
Robert, it's an extraordinary parallel when you talk about in your own life leaving that good job, right? And all of our families have talked to us about the good job. You know, what's interesting is we'll talk about Martin Luther King later. He had a real good job as pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. He was able to make a living, afford a home for his family, provide safety and security, and he took on a whole bunch of risk. He took on the risk of dogs and water hoses and all of those angry folk to make real change. And it seems slight in comparison that our taking of risk would simply be leaving a good job to start a great business. So I applaud you and congratulate you on it. Let's transition to something that's near and dear to both of our hearts, and that's this U.S. pension system, Robert. So let me frame it for you. You and I have held many conversations about the notion that while there were many extraordinary dividends of the civil rights movement, one of the biggest dividends was access. And in this particular case, access to great employment, federal jobs, state jobs, public sector jobs, corporate jobs that all promised a defined benefit pension. Let me stop there. We know that that was the dividend, but walk us through what happened with that dividend and where we are today surrounding that wealth.
Right. I hearken back to Dr. Martin Luther King, and you think about what the March on Washington was about. It was an economic march.
Period.
Okay, that gets lost. He gave a beautiful speech from his heart, and what he was expressing is the desire for a beloved community. And Sister Bernice King is focused on that element of how do we create this beloved community. Part of that beloved community is economic opportunity. And when they created, and unfortunately a lot of that came through the spilling of a lot of African American blood, the opportunity for us to have participation into the economy, working for the federal, state governments, teachers unions, etc. It created an opportunity for us to pay into these pension plans and give ourselves some security, de-risk a life that heretofore we had the ultimate risk. We took, you come out of coming out of Homestead Act, Southern Homestead Act, GI Bill. We did not participate equitably in those programs that would create wealth and security for our families. But now we have access to be part of these pensions, these defined benefit plans, and we pay into them all our lives. And unfortunately, demographics show our lives are shorter, so the payouts typically aren't necessarily equal to what we paid in on an inflation-adjusted and risk-return basis.
And you only ever achieve the income on it. You don't ever get the principal.
Right. It's only the income, and that income, great support, et cetera. But now we have to think about how do we solve the problems that we have in our communities today, problems of access and opportunity and capital. Well, these pension systems are some of the, of course, the repositories of a lot of that capital. And, part of NAIC, what you all do is to drive an understanding into those pension systems of how effective we as diverse managers have been in managing this capital, not only in terms of the return, but again, the return back to the community beyond the dollars that go back to that pension plan. And so the thought, and for many of folks in the audience, Bob and I have been talking about is, we should assess and understand what that wealth actually is that sits in those plans, and how do we direct that specifically into the communities that, quite frankly, do not have access to it today. Some of it's through the management, but some of it should be directly driven to solving some of the problems. And we've got some great pension fund managers out there who are thinking about it, who are thoughtful and make sure that, there's diversity. And, we are at Vista are great beneficiaries of a lot of that. But there are others who aren't thinking about that. And some of those actually have some of the highest contributions. There's one plan I know, 36% of that teachers union is African American, but yet they give less than 1% of the assets under management to African American managers.
Robert, let me paint a picture of what we're talking about here, right? So virtually every public school teacher, every public government employee, every policeman, every fireman, and everyone of in probably a 50-year window that has worked has both contributed to and had their employer contribute on their behalf to a pension plan. If you look at this notion of the wealth gap in America, the average person the average African American doesn't have $400 for an emergency bill. Much of our wealth, and I would argue the greatest source of our wealth in the African American and Asian community, in the Latinx community, is in these pension plans, and it's trapped. And you use the term, and we delighted in its irony of unsovereign wealth. Talk a little bit about unsovereign wealth.
Right. And you and I, Bob, have talked about this. There should be some thought, some work, some action around how do you evaluate that and create an unsovereign wealth fund in the U.S. and say, okay, here is the amount of capital that now is residing in this $19 trillion.
That's the number.
All right. That should actually be thought about to be used to create the opportunity for those who have contributed to it, but their communities are not getting a proportionate amount of that delivered back to their community. And we need to do that work and then come forward with some proposals as to how we can go solve those problems.
Yeah.
And I think, that is a worthy effort for the NAIC to take on. It's a worthy effort I know that I will support with the NAIC to figure out, how do we take advantage of the dividend of the civil rights movement that our grandparents and parents, frankly, shed blood, sweat, tears, and time in contributing to, but they're not getting the proportionate amounts that are either being delivered back to money managers or, frankly, more importantly, delivered back to the communities that they come from. When you actually depress one of their biggest assets, which is housing, through redlining, it decreases their ability to participate in that wealth. African Americans have one tenth the wealth of white Americans.
Yep.
Okay? And that is something that needs to change. If we do this right, it will increase our whole GDP by another 1.5%, 5-6%.
Yeah.
And there's no reason why we couldn't. So this gets back a little bit to the ecosystem part. Look, Bob, fund managers, if you're running the big pension funds, I think a lot of our are thoughtful, but need to be more thoughtful in ensuring that these asset managers get a fair share of allocation. Of course, performance matters. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you give it, but we have shown that we have the ability to not just perform, but outperform in many cases. We've been taught to take less risk in those deals, so we have lower loss ratios on the one hand, right, and in disproportionate upside. So we should, everyone should do their part in leaning in continuing to ensure that these managers have the ability to go and not only exercise their trade and give money back to the community that is funding them, which are these African American teachers and pensioners, firefighters and police officers, et cetera, but also the ability for us to deliver the value creation in terms of jobs into our community. Those are all the important elements of this ecosystem that we have to work together to do.
So, Robert, you have grown very widely known for your philanthropy. You don't brag about it. Others usually are telling the story, and you're off thinking about the next thing that you can go do. I personally applaud you for that. But one of the things that gets overlooked is the impact you're trying to have on the very systems you're talking about. Right? The ecosystem, the social network. How do you how does somebody, even if it's one person with a lot of influence, create that sort of change, right? And you've birthed a lot of solutions, the 2% solution. You hyperfund a lot of civic organizations. You can name them, I won't, but NAIC is certainly one of them. But talk to us a little bit about where you draw influence on these ideas, and then what you have to do to push them and to get them implemented.
Yeah. And thank you for that question. There are two major influences on my life. Three. I need to give one. One is my spiritual learnings and teachings, and the opportunity to think about that every morning, how I fill my cup. What is my purpose here. And I'm fortunate I have a group of people that I get to share those thoughts with around how we use God and God's influence on our lives. The second is the community I came from and the community that I'm part of. When you grow up in a community where you saw some people's only resources were that they could, read to a child who didn't have someone to read to them because their parents weren't home, but they did that. Some people, because they became, heads of our rocket clubs, didn't get paid. And, I think it's 5 out of the 8 people who were in that little rocket club became engineers in this Black community.
Yeah.
Right? They didn't get paid to do any of this, but they did it. And then I look and I see what my role and opportunity can be. If I can do things at scale, then that's what I should do. So that's one influence.
Okay.
The third influence, Frankie, is, being an engineer. And, engineers get notoriously frustrated by solving one problem one time as opposed to solving that one problem forever. And so when I think about how we approach these solutions, they need, when you have systemic racism, which is, Frankie, the worst thing that we have on this planet, and particularly now in this country, then we need to find systemic solutions to solve it. Not one-off solutions, those can help, but we need systemic solutions to drive capital systemically into these unbanked and underbanked communities. 70% of African-American communities don't have a branch bank in them. Well, how will people get loans to buy houses or businesses, to get loans to expand their business or business opportunities if you don't have access to that capital? And then you look at the capillary banking system. Well, they don't have the modernization. So let's figure out how to modernize, and technology is available. And then let's figure out how to capitalize, and, technology and, folks at Bank of America, et cetera, have come up with these equality, progress, sustainability bonds that actually can capitalize these businesses and these banks. And then how do we capitalize the supply chain of the small to medium African American Latinx businesses? Well, there's ways to do that using some of those bonds, ways to do that, leveraging some of the things that they're doing at Aerial Capital. You see what I mean? Okay, so let's start to pull those together. And then we say, okay, well, how do we handle, the broadband? This very 36% of African-American homes don't have broadband. And the kids, when we got, had to go home for, because of the pandemic, don't have access to school systems. Well, we've got a company that can actually deliver some of those LMS systems. But we also need to talk to, which is what we're doing, and partnering with, the T-Mobiles and the Verizons and AT&T to say, here are the communities that need that help. How are we going to help them? And then you push it through the infrastructure bill, Latimer plan, et cetera. But, using the platform of relationships that we have and that I have, I think that's part of what my job is. That's the calling that tells this is what you now have to do. Sure, my highest and best use in some days is sitting down and reading a book to my children. Yeah. Sometimes my highest and best use is to call upon the White House to make some changes in the way that capital is getting distributed into our communities. And so I have to follow that calling with due passion and use the resources and capacity that I have to try to make this place a little better than how you and I found it.